What if the established narrative was a lie? What if we were told that one of the world's most economically challenged nations, a country in the heart of Africa, just settled a debt of nearly $5 billion and did so without a single cent from Western financial institutions? It sounds like a fantasy, but this is the reality unfolding in Burkina Faso. This nation is not just changing its own fortunes, it is fundamentally challenging the global order and shattering the patronizing myth of African dependency. This is the story of how Burkina Faso looked the West in the eye and declared, "We do not need you." How is this small, landlocked country demonstrating to the world the path to true liberation from the shackles of neo-colonial finance? For decades, we have been conditioned to believe that Africa's progress is contingent upon Western generosity. Burkina Faso is proving that this entire premise is false. They have just cleared their national debt without external assistance, a feat of profound significance. Imagine the audacity of a nation, so often dismissed as impoverished, seizing complete control of its financial destiny and accomplishing it entirely on its own terms. But how was this monumental task achieved? The answer lies in a story of incredible national will and brilliant strategy. The moment of revelation arrived in 2024, when Dr. Apollinaire Kyelem de Tambela, the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the global financial system. He confirmed the full repayment of $4.79 billion in domestic debt. The world was forced to take notice. There was no International Monetary Fund bailout package, no emergency loans from the World Bank, and certainly no handouts from former colonial powers. This was an act of supreme financial defiance, a clear statement that Burkina Faso would no longer operate under the dictates of the international financial establishment. The leadership rejected the insidious narrative that Africa's poorest are destined for a perpetual cycle of aid and debt. Instead, they placed their faith in their own people and their own markets. In a region historically defined by its reliance on Western financial lifelines, Burkina Faso had just rewritten the rulebook. So, how did a nation frequently labeled a financial basket case engineer such a remarkable turnaround, especially while navigating a landscape of intense political and security pressures? The solution was found in a series of calculated, strategic maneuvers that transformed domestic debt from a burden into an engine for economic liberation. The primary strategy was a radical reorientation of its financing model. Instead of looking outward for loans and aid from Western institutions, Burkina Faso turned inward. The government began issuing bonds directly to its own people. Local investors, thriving businesses, commercial banks, and ordinary citizens who were witnessing a surge of confidence in their nation's leadership and its economic future. At first, encouraging domestic borrowing might appear counterintuitive for a country grappling with significant security threats from insurgent groups. Yet, the leadership of Burkina Faso astutely recognized that a potent combination of rising national pride, a deep sense of unity, and an evolving domestic financial infrastructure had created the perfect conditions for tapping into this powerful local resource. By offering government bonds on the local market, they opened a direct channel for domestic capital to fuel the nation's development and settle its obligations. This entire strategy was built on a foundation of trust. The leadership cultivated unwavering confidence in their stewardship of the nation's finances. As the government demonstrated a profound commitment to fiscal discipline and tangible infrastructure development, local investors grew increasingly willing to lend their capital to their own country. For the first time in a generation, Burkina Faso was no longer beholden to the whims of foreign markets or international banking syndicates. It was relying on the financial fortitude of its own citizens. This move catalyzed a monumental shift in the national consciousness, transforming a mindset of dependency into a powerful belief in homegrown solutions. The results were nothing short of spectacular, as investor confidence surged and the government successfully unlocked a vast, previously untapped reservoir of domestic capital. By championing this strategy, Burkina Faso has delivered a powerful lesson. Domestic debt, when managed with wisdom and national pride, can be the ultimate tool for achieving self-sufficiency. If you believe in Traoré's vision for African sovereignty, hit that like button and share this story to help spread the truth about Burkina Faso's awakening. One of the most extraordinary elements of this strategy was the government's ability to maintain and even grow investor confidence against a backdrop of significant turmoil. The persistent threat of terrorism and the wider conflict sweeping across the Sahel region placed immense strain on the nation's resources. Nevertheless, Burkina Faso's leadership navigated these treacherous waters with remarkable skill, preserving a stable financial environment that allowed them to continue issuing bonds and raising critical funds from within their own borders. In any other country, such instability would typically trigger massive capital flight, with investors rushing to pull their money out in fear of the conflict. Burkina Faso reversed this trend entirely. The government implemented deliberate measures to ensure its bond market remained a secure and attractive proposition for domestic investors. The Prime Minister and his economic team prioritized absolute transparency, clear fiscal management, and an unwavering public commitment to eliminating the national debt. They sent a powerful message to investors. Even in the midst of crisis, Burkina Faso possesses the resilience and the unshakable determination to overcome any storm. This growing confidence was further solidified by the government's strategic utilization of its abundant natural resources. With the mining sector serving as a primary engine of Burkina Faso's economy, the leadership astutely leveraged revenues from its prolific gold industry to underwrite its domestic debt. This provided investors with a crucial extra layer of security, assuring them that the government possessed tangible, valuable assets that could be called upon if needed. In the face of immense external pressures, Burkina Faso made a choice that few other African nations have dared to consider. It seized control of its own financial destiny and communicated its unwavering resilience to the investment community. Rather than capitulating to the West's demands for political concessions or painful fiscal austerity, they chose to build and rely upon their own financial ecosystem, and the results speak for themselves. While the government was busy issuing these bonds, the wider Burkinabe financial system was playing a pivotal role in ensuring their success. Burkina Faso took proactive measures to mobilize local savings on an unprecedented scale. Commercial banks, pension funds, and private businesses were actively encouraged to invest in the government bonds, which offered them a safe, profitable return, while simultaneously contributing to the vital project of national debt repayment. The private sector's participation was absolutely essential. As stability grew and a positive outlook on the government's financial strategy took hold, local businesses began to pour capital into the nation's infrastructure projects and domestic bonds. Through this deliberate cultivation of public-private partnerships, Burkina Faso fostered a powerful sense of shared responsibility for the country's economic triumph. Simultaneously, the nation's financial sector began innovating to deepen its market reach. New and sophisticated financial products, such as bond options, were introduced to attract a more diverse array of investors. This strategic move ensured that the government's bonds were accessible to everyone, from major banking institutions to small-scale local entrepreneurs. Consequently, a steady and powerful stream of capital flowed into the country's debt repayment fund, enabling Burkina Faso to meet its obligations without ever needing to turn to the West. Paying off a $4.79 billion debt is not merely an accounting exercise. It requires the creation of conditions for sustainable, long-term economic expansion. The leadership of Burkina Faso understood this critical principle. They made the strategic decision to use the capital raised from domestic debt, not only to settle past obligations, but also to finance forward-looking projects that would fundamentally enhance the country's economic resilience for generations to come. The government directed these funds toward critical infrastructure improvements, with a special focus on vital sectors such as transportation, energy, and mining. By reinvesting in the nation's physical and economic backbone, Burkina Faso was constructing a solid foundation for future prosperity. This infrastructure development was not just essential for boosting internal economic activity, it was also a strategic move to enhance the country's appeal to a new class of foreign investors those seeking partnership with a stable and growing economy in West Africa. By prioritizing these long-term projects, Burkina Faso demonstrated that its debt repayment strategy was not simply about clearing the books. It was about investing in a future where the country could stand confidently on its own 2 feet, free from the need to rely on foreign lenders. This visionary approach allowed Burkina Faso to transition from a state of mere survival to one of thriving ambition. The national debt was not just eliminated, it became the catalyst for unlocking a new era of economic opportunity. Burkina Faso's success, therefore, represents far more than a financial achievement. It is a defiant declaration about the future of Africa. By retiring its domestic debt through shrewd strategic planning and the mobilization of local investment, the country has proven that it does not require Western validation to prosper. This is not just a story of financial solvency, it is a powerful saga of economic independence. Burkina Faso took a calculated risk on its own people, its own markets, and its own resources. Instead of continuing to lean on international institutions or plead for foreign aid, the government chose to rely on its own domestic strength. They harnessed local capital, cultivated unwavering investor confidence, and reinvested strategically in the country's long-term growth. In doing so, they have established a groundbreaking new precedent for Africa's economic destiny. Burkina Faso is actively challenging the established global order. It has shown the world that African nations possess the tools, the resources, and the resilience to overcome the crippling legacy of foreign debt dependency. The question that now echoes across the continent is a simple but profound one. If Burkina Faso can achieve this, why are other African nations not following its lead? Now, we must address the question that hangs in the air. Did Burkina Faso receive any assistance from the West during its time of profound crisis? The reality of the situation is not just shocking, it is a damning indictment of the West's true intentions. Instead of the solidarity and support one might expect in a crisis, the West, led by the European Union and other major powers, effectively turned its back on Burkina Faso. In a move of staggering hypocrisy, they chose to freeze all aid and impose crippling sanctions immediately following the military coups that reshaped the country's political landscape in 2022. Imagine the circumstances. Burkina Faso was already mired in internal turmoil, engaged in a desperate fight against violent insurgencies, grappling with immense security challenges, and attempting to rebuild after a major political transition. It was at this moment of maximum vulnerability that it looked to its supposed Western partners for support. What it received in return was not a helping hand, but a punitive fist. The European Union, along with other Western nations, suspended all financial assistance, including funds that were vital for development projects. This was a clear and brutal attempt to force Burkina Faso into submission, a coercive strategy designed to compel the country to align with Western political and economic directives. The message was unambiguous. If you refuse to play by our rules, we will ensure that your people suffer. Do you believe Africa is finally breaking free from foreign control? Comment yes below. These sanctions, part of a broader strategy to exert neo-colonial control, were not merely a symbolic gesture. They were meticulously designed to destabilize the country further. The West harbored the hope that these measures would pressure Burkina Faso's leaders to capitulate, abandon their military-led government, and reverse the coup that had ousted the previous civilian leadership. In essence, the Western strategy was to inflict enough pain on the nation that its people would turn against their own government and demand a return to a status quo that served Western interests, one that entailed bowing to demands for political and economic reforms dictated from abroad. But what transpired next defied all their calculations and turned the tables completely. Burkina Faso did not collapse into chaos. It did not come begging for forgiveness or assistance. Instead, its government did something truly unprecedented in modern African history. It decided to forge its own path. The country's leadership, under President Ibrahim Traoré, faced down this immense international pressure and flatly refused to yield. They did not ask for clemency, and they certainly did not grovel for the restoration of foreign aid. They took their nation's destiny into their own hands. This was not a reckless decision born of desperation. It was a calculated and courageous move. Burkina Faso made a choice that many African nations, for too long, have not dared to make. They concluded that they did not need the West to survive. In a revolutionary act of self-reliance, the nation turned its back on international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and instead turned toward its own people, its own local markets, and its own financial system. This was an incredibly powerful act, especially considering the political and security maelstrom engulfing the country. It is no easy feat to reject international aid, particularly when African nations are constantly told that they are incapable of surviving without it. But Burkina Faso's leadership made a critical, history-altering decision. They would no longer be complicit in the narrative that portrays Africa as helpless. They understood perfectly that the West had long viewed African nations as perpetual supplicants, unable to stand upright without foreign assistance. Burkina Faso resolved to shatter that narrative once and for all. This decision to reject Western aid and defy sanctions marked a pivotal turning point. Rather than folding under the weight of international pressure, the country chose to embrace a new path defined by self-reliance. There would be no more dependency on Western handouts, and no more waiting for international donors to determine Africa's fate. The leadership pivoted to a strategy that was radical in its elegant simplicity. They would look to their own local markets for support, rallying businesses, banks, and individual investors to back the government's sovereign project. They knew the real challenge was to build that trust at home, to convince the Burkinabe people that they could, and would, succeed on their own. The West had counted on the notion that conflict inevitably leads to economic collapse. They were certain Burkina Faso would be on its knees within months. The exact opposite occurred. Local markets and businesses rallied behind the government's vision, and significant capital was raised from local investors, allowing the nation to sidestep Western creditors entirely. The result was a resounding success that the West never saw coming. Burkina Faso continued its development, paid its debts, and stabilized its economy without a single dollar of assistance from the institutions that tried to break it. This triumph is not just about surviving without the West, it is about thriving on Africa's own terms. The West fundamentally underestimated the power of African self-determination. Burkina Faso's leadership has proven that African nations possess the agency to make their own decisions and manage their own finances without bowing to foreign powers. It is a stark contrast to the narrative that has been aggressively pushed for decades, one where Africa is perpetually in need. By taking a stand, Burkina Faso has shattered this stereotype. This success is a message to all of Africa. You do not need to ask for permission to thrive. So why do so many other African countries remain tethered to Western aid as if it were their only lifeline? The uncomfortable truth is that the system of dependency is a deliberate creation, a cycle that benefits the West far more than it benefits Africa. For years, this system has allowed for the vast extraction of wealth from the continent, all while keeping nations reliant on foreign loans. The narrative of an Africa in need is not an accident, it is a strategy. But Burkina Faso has shown this cycle can be broken. The question is, will more African nations take its lead? Will they finally break free and build economies that serve their own people? Burkina Faso's success is not a miracle. It is a blueprint for financial sovereignty. The resources, the talent, and the potential to fund Africa's own development already exist within Africa. The key is a shift in mindset. It is time for Africa to stop relying on handouts and start building a self-sufficient future. Subscribe for more stories of African resilience. Like this video if it opened your eyes, and share it with anyone who needs to see Africa's true potential.